Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started now. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Nielsen. Let's see if this is actually going to work. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Let's see. I don't know if this audio will work. Maybe not. Something seems like it's working. Doesn't it? Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, cool. I'm going to show you. Have you guys ever seen this? It's called the virtual choir. This actually came out quite a while ago. And it's pretty cool music, first of all, but what this man did is he sent an invitation to, I guess, hundreds or thousands of people around the world and said, would you like to be in my virtual choir? And each one of these people took his music and learned it, and then recorded themselves singing their part. And then he put this all together and created this virtual choir. Pretty cool idea. Has nothing to do with Bluemix or my talk. But I think what it speaks to is just the power of all of the talent that you put together from around the world and what you can do with it. It's pretty amazing. And you know, this came out, I remember, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, something like that. And it really inspired me because I was putting on events around the world that required volunteers to help me organize them, and just made me think about all the different ways in which together using you know, individual talents combined, what we might be able to accomplish. I can share this with you if you'd like, it's pretty cool, but I need to move on here now. So my name is Dave Nielsen, and I've organized over, well, hundreds of cloud computing conferences around the world. They've all been small, somewhere between, you know, a few dozen to a few hundred. And through that, I've learned a heck of a lot about what is going on in the industry, what has happened in the past, and perhaps where it's taking us. Some of the things that I'm sure about are that platform as a service is one of the areas we're headed in. We already see it today, and what I want to share with you is a little bit of an open source business model that you might think about, perhaps embracing yourselves, and then also show you what you can do with two open source platforms. One is the Bluemix platform, and the other one is Redis Labs database platform, which is basically a Redis platform, and how you might do something similar. So first of all, I work at Redis Labs, and prior to that, I worked at a company called StrikeIron, which was an API platform, and I also worked at PayPal in the early days. I'm a big fan of APIs because you can, as a developer, almost like magic, make an API call and get a heck of a lot of value into your application. And also I'm a big fan of unconferences where you bring together a bunch of smart people and you let them kind of guide the conference and determine what's interesting. I learned about unconferences a long time ago when I wrote a book called PayPal Hacks for O'Reilly Media. I was one of the first, if not the first, web API evangelist, and they invited me to their event called Foo Camp, which was an unconference. I didn't know what an unconference was, but it turns out that Foo stands for Friends of O'Reilly, and camp literally was a camp, so we literally camped up at Tim O'Reilly's offices up in Sebastopol. An unconference is very unstructured. You basically let people come just like this. We could actually create an unconference right here if we wanted to. I'm not going to do it, don't worry. Where I invite you to propose the topics, and then we have an actual conference based on those topics. It can be very interesting and very illuminating. You can learn a lot. It can be somewhat structured so that you can actually end up with a more traditional conference by the end of it. And you can also propose some of the topics online so that when you actually show up, the conference is already ready. I organized about 350 of these under the topic of cloud computing. We called it Cloud Camp, and we had people all over the world organize their own cloud camps. I also got involved in other unconferences. We just had Data Science Camp not too long ago, which I helped organize a little bit in its early days. I've also been involved with NoSQL Camp, Ops Camp, DevOps Camp, Big Data Camp. Now we're moving off into things like Marketing Camp and Container Days. Lots of different unconference formats. But there's other types of formats you can get interested in, involved in too, like hackathons. That's also somewhat of a unformat. And I've created a website called campsite.org, which is really in beta right now. I wouldn't recommend you run out and use it, but it allows you to basically create your own event that you put on either in person or online, and then you let people around the world fork it and put on their own event under the same kind of brand or theme. So I'm working on that right now. It's still pretty early, but I will be hopefully running that on the platforms that I talk about today. So I will talk more about that later. Before we go any further though, I want to talk a little bit about open and what that means. Open can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. For example, it could just simply mean I'm going to go run be free. I can do whatever I want. That's a nice kind of open, I suppose, but it doesn't really help too much if you just run away. So there's also, of course, open source. And open source is great because you can put up some code, you can let other people see it, they can help improve it, they can verify that it does what they think it does and trust it. Lots of good things about open by being able to see the code. Open's also good because it helps with no lock-in, meaning that the vendor who is providing you the product, if they're using open source, there might be an alternative out there that you can go and use, and that way you get the benefits of open source and competition. And then, I think the best part about it is the ability to collaborate. You can get the best of, all of the brightest minds around the world to collaborate and contribute and basically review your own code. You can call it free work, but I think it's not really free. It's people are contributing their value, and I don't think they consider that free. It's somebody's spending the time and energy to contribute. If you're not familiar with open source has kind of become more and more and more of a standard. Not so much in this regards of here's some specific rules that you must abide by in order to be considered open source, but there are different groups who have come up with these guidelines. And of course, the open source initiative is one of them, and here you can see the open source guidelines here. I think it's important. I think that most software that you create today should be open source at its foundation, and then if you want to build around that some value that you can charge for, I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's great. I hope that you all consider that. There's some great projects out there. Here's just some Linux distributions that you may have heard of. There's a lot of licenses now, so you don't have to live by just one license. There's GPL, which is one of the first popular ones, but now Apache and BSD and MIT licenses and others are also growing in popularity. And there's lots of different companies out there, or I should say organizations, that will help you run your open source project. So the Linux Foundation now is running other foundations, sort of as a service, I guess you could say. So there's different projects if you want to contribute to maybe OpenStack. They have different projects within the OpenStack. It's not just Nova, which is the compute part. There's all these other projects in there as well. So there's lots of ways in which you can not have to do it all yourself. And now, of course, there's some challenges with open sourcing your code. You don't just open source it and expect everything to go swimmingly fantastic. You should be strategic about it. You may not want to open source code before you're ready for others to compete with you. Okay, so that is your prerogative as the open source creator to keep a hold on to it. Maybe just keep it until it's high quality, and you're the one who's kind of released it to the wild, and you know it the best, so others will come to you to help them implement it. Or you're ready to run it as a service. You also don't want to release it without any sort of licensing, because you want to make sure that that this is you're not responsible for anything that goes wrong. So be careful about what you do. Be thoughtful. Make sure you release it in a thoughtful and careful way. Now I'm going to move on to the next part of my talk, which is more about cloud computing and the role of open source and platforms in that world. you've probably heard that software is eating the world, and automation is really what that means. Software is automating a lot of things. What's interesting about that, by the way, is a lot of companies who are using open source and automating are not actually contributing back to open source. There's a lot of companies using it, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, etc. There's a lot of companies using it, but Amazon does not contribute much back. I don't know of any project that they contribute to. So they're not really that big of a supporter of open. Their store is always open, but their software seems to be always closed. And I don't appreciate that, honestly. I think they do a great job with their product, but I don't think that I think they're basically building up a big proprietary system that will lock a bunch of people in, and we all like the service, but then what happens? Think about that. Think about that when you're locked in and you really have no way out. What kind of relationship do you have with that vendor? What will that naturally lead to? Is that a good thing? So, so what do you do? Well, open source is okay. You could have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 is you're going to go and do something like open source your code. Phase 2, you don't really know what that is. And phase 3, profit. Is that a good strategy? Probably not. I don't know if you ever watched South Park, but this was a really funny episode where they were stealing underwear and with a business model like this. And they really didn't know what they were going to do with the underwear, which is really funny. Anyway, there are companies out there who are using open source or creating open source and profiting from it. And I think that's a really important aspect of how you can create software today. If you want to create your own software or software as a service and you want to charge for it and make money off of it, that's great. Absolutely, go for that. If you can open source part of what you do, even better, in the way I think about it. So here's some companies. WordPress is a very simple example. They offer WordPress.com. You can also download the software from WordPress.org. Discourse is another open source project. Git, of course, is very famous now, and GitHub has made it even more famous. So there are some great options out there and some good examples. What I'm a proponent of is something called open source cloud service, and that's where you take and create free open source software and you actually run it as a service to show that your software is actually doing what you claim it can do. People can use it that way. Maybe that's all they do, is they just use your software as a service. But you also can offer a commercially supported version where they can run it wherever they want. And there are some really big companies out there that will pay a lot of money for that. So it's a good option if you can achieve it. There's lots of projects out there that do this. Redis is one of them. The Cloud Foundry project is another one. Docker is another one. MuleSoft, kind of. Zimbra, there's a bunch of them out there. The first one I talk about briefly is IBM Bluemix. So it is based on a bunch of different projects, but one of the largest projects that it's based on is Cloud Foundry. The Cloud Foundry Summit was just in Berlin. I think it just ended today, actually. And you can go use IBM's product called Bluemix at bluemix.net, or as an enterprise, you can download it and run it yourself, or have IBM help you run it on their servers or any server, I suppose. And the way they do it is they basically contribute heavily to the open source project, but they're only one of many. They support the project, so they're, whatever premium platform sponsor you can be. And then they offer a supported version of that product. So that's one use case. Another use case would be Redis Labs, a company I work for. So Redis is a very open source project. It's a Berkeley license, very liberal. You can take it and you can start selling it right away if you'd like, or doing whatever you want with it, as long as you leave the attribution in the source code. We offer it as a service at rediscloud.com, or I should say it, Redis Labs / Redis Cloud. Just go to redislabs.com and you can sign up for there. And we also offer it as a software product that we support. And it's not just one Redis database, so when you download and run Redis, you're basically running one Redis database or one shard. What we do is we basically have a Redis database management system, or DBMS, and what that means is that you install our management product, and then you can tell our product how many Redis databases you want to deploy. Do you want backup? Do you want high availability? Do you want replication? All that kind of stuff, all done through one product. And we offer that as software. Now, how do we do it? Well, we hired recently the creator of Redis, so that's one way we're contributing to the project, is by paying for his salary. He primarily works on the open source project, but he does work for us. That's a nice vote of confidence as well. We also sponsor the open source project, and we contribute heavily to it. And then again, we support a paid version or enterprise version of the project. Now, this company actually started, Redis Labs actually started as a consulting company, and they had many companies who wanted to use Redis basically as a service, so that's how they began the company. And they provide it through an API, so you can actually use the open source API to connect to Redis as a service. So that's the Redis as a service product, and then we have the software product. And so finally, we basically support the open source project, offer it as a service, and offer it as software you can download. And like I said, I call that an open source service provider model. Another way I'm thinking of describing it is basically a cloud native business model as well. I don't know, how many of you have heard of the term cloud native? Only 3 of you? So cloud native is something that you'll hear often within the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, and it basically means build software that is meant to run in the cloud. So don't store files on your local hard disk. Don't put logs in there that build up over time and fill up and then crash your system. Like, do things that will let your application continually run without eventually falling apart, or if it were to, if you had to take your service down and reload it again, you wouldn't lose anything. So basically build an application that's meant for the cloud and takes full advantage of the cloud. So that's just one, I don't know what the right name for it will be. I'm just coming up with a couple ideas. There's one more I'll just show you. This is a project called, or a company called fanout.io. They open sourced a bunch of stuff. They run it as a service, and they also run the software that you can, or provide the software. And basically what they allow you to do is take your application that has an API, and they basically put up sort of an interface to your customers or to your own application to provide pub/sub. So basically allow data to be pushed into other systems proactively for you without having to constantly pull and hit the server repeatedly when there may not be any new data. And so they basically open sourced a bunch of stuff so others can contribute or help them bug check or whatever, and they also offer it as a service, and they offer the enterprise version. There's a bunch of other companies who do this. Believe it or not, they're not all the same type of business model, but I don't know if you know how Firefox really got going. It became a popular browser, and it turned out that that little default page that they start up, where it basically is a search page, is worth a lot of money. So they got initially Google to pay them something around $20 million a year just to have the Google search page as the default for Firefox. It's no coincidence that their headquarters was basically across the street from Google for a while. I think they've recently switched to Yahoo or somebody else for that. So, but that is a decent business model for an open source project. Deis, which is a platform as a service project, somewhat kind of like Cloud Foundry a bit. They provide consulting. That's basically how they monetize right now, as if you want to build a Deis platform as a service environment, you can have them implement it for you. And then there's also trademarking. So if you have a product that gets very popular, you can sell, you can trademark it, and then you can sell like t-shirts and that kind of stuff. But that's kind of off and beyond. There's lots of other models. What I want to do now is get beyond these business models and show you a little bit more about, well here, I'll come back to this actually. Bluemix and Cloud Foundry, and then Redis and Redis Labs. So, how many of you are familiar with Bluemix? Okay, not that many, all right. Okay, how about Redis? How many of you are familiar with Redis? A few more, okay, great. Well, let me first describe Bluemix. Bluemix is a platform as a service, and the reason why you should care about platform as a service is the same reason why back in the 80s you would care about Windows or PCs. And here's why. So, turns out if you look back at the history of the PC, or the early days of the PC, you can actually see some trends that are re-emerging in the cloud. And you can learn from them, and you can actually start predicting what will happen. And if you look at the players involved, you can see why they're involved and the fact that they're repeating history, essentially. And we're watching it all happen right in front of us. A good example of that would be, I don't know how many of you were around at the time, but I was young, but I remember when the Apple II came out. You guys remember the Apple II? Yeah. Okay, yay. You know, I played games on it. I was pretty young, but I do remember when that came out. Our neighbor down the street had one, and I'd go down and play with it. That was the first product, at least in my mind, that sort of proved that the PC market was real. People were buying it. It was going into their home. There was actually a market there.
That was around 1988.
Oh, before 88.
Before 88 already?
Definitely before 88.
I came from China. So
oh, okay. Yeah, definitely before 88. I don't know when, but I would guess maybe early 80s. I can't remember exactly when.
1977.
So was it 77?
Wow,
Apple
okay.
II?
Mac was 82.
Okay, that's right. Right. Okay. So anyway, it was when I was young. But then after that, soon after that, we saw DOS. Right. Now, what would you say is the difference between DOS and the Mac?
DOS doesn't work.
No, it would.
DOS could run on different
Text-based,
vendors'
text-based.
hardware,
Yeah,
right? It could run
yeah.
on IBM, HP, etc. Right? Okay. So, and whereas the Apple II could only run on Apple's hardware.
Yeah.
Then once that proved the market, okay, we saw that the market was evolving and emerging, and people were buying, and you can see the market grow quickly. They basically doubled down, and that's when you saw the Apple Macintosh come out. And the Apple Macintosh had a lot more features. It had a nice GUI with mouse and lots of features for developers to build their applications. And this is when Guy Kawasaki was out there evangelizing to developers that they should build apps on Macintosh. So you saw a whole developer ecosystem emerge. And of course, what came after that was Windows. And Windows basically copied that concept and was successful running an operating system on different vendors' hardware. So they had a greater ecosystem. So if you look at the cloud, we saw the same thing happen basically, almost exactly the same. The equivalent of the Apple II would be for perhaps Amazon EC2. Okay, it's proving that the cloud computing model, the cheap cloud service model on basically commodity cloud hardware would work. You could say perhaps that the DOS equivalent of that would be like VMware, vCloud or something like that, or maybe OpenStack, okay? So vCloud might be like the Windows version, OpenStack might be the Linux version, but whatever. It could run on different cloud vendors' hardware if the hardware supported that software. So then you would, I'm sorry, not Windows, that would be like the equivalent of DOS, sorry. Apple II and DOS. And so what would be the equivalent of the Macintosh? I would argue that it could be maybe Salesforce.com, but that wasn't really wildly popular. Good product, but just not very popular. Too closed source, by the way. Perhaps Heroku. Heroku came along and did a fantastic job, well over 1 million users, very popular. Ran on, it was proprietary software, it ran on proprietary cloud, it ran on Amazon actually, but it was all proprietary. So the question is, if that's the Apple, if that's the Apple Macintosh, what's the Microsoft Windows of the cloud? And by the way, I know that you may not all agree with me.
Yeah,
but
yes, open source.
I'm just-
yeah, yeah,
Well, it would have to be open source just because that's the
Yeah.
way the world is today.
yeah.
And I would make the argument that it would be platform as a service, and it would probably be something like Cloud Foundry, right? If not Cloud Foundry. Now, here's some things that you might note. Cloud Foundry can run on, actually it was originally built to run on VMware, okay, which, like I said before, is kind of like the DOS of the cloud. Or it also runs on OpenStack. It also can run on Amazon EC2. So it runs on that DOS, Apple II-ish environment. I don't know if you know this, but when Windows first came out, well, here's a question for you. Do you know what operating system Windows first ran on? Trick question, right? Because isn't Windows an operating system? What operating system did it actually run on? DOS, right? What operating system does Cloud Foundry run on? Like I just mentioned, OpenStack. The ones that are the equivalent of DOS in the cloud, right? So you see a lot of the patterns emerging here, right? Also, Paul Moritz, who was from Microsoft and was running VMware, he's the one who spun Pivotal out from VMware, basically the open source project. So there's a lot of Microsoft DNA in there. So and a lot of companies get this. This is not like, I'm not making something up here. It's more or less becoming a well-known concept. But you should pay attention because in the open source world, what happens is you don't go and buy Cloud Foundry. That's the open source project. That'd be like running the Linux kernel. That's not going to give you a lot. What you want is the company then to build a complete product around that, and that's what you would end up buying or using. And that's what IBM has done. They've taken Cloud Foundry and they've packaged it up. They run it as a service at Bluemix.net, and then you can also, as a company, run your own cloud using Bluemix as well. Now they put other things in there, just like Red Hat and Canonical have put other things in their Linux distributions as well. But fundamentally, it's a Cloud Foundry platform as a service, and they intend to compete for the enterprise cloud operating system. There's other companies out there competing against them, like Pivotal, who created the open source project, and some others, even HP. So there's definitely a competition going on. And in the cloud, there's even more competition because there's even more companies running Cloud Foundry just as a service. So what I'd like to do now is show you what it would be like to deploy an application. Now, first of all, let me just show you that this is just like any other application. It's a very simple application that I created. You probably can't really see this very well. Hold on a second here. I don't know why I can't.
Track and Code Plus, Apple Plus.
I just did that. No, okay, now it's working. Okay, good. Aha, needed somebody to say that. Okay, so it's just an application with any code that you might run. One thing about this is I'm not saving any files to the local disk. That's one thing I've done. And when I talk to a database, I'm talking to a database that's already set up and running in the Redis cloud. But it's just regular code. This is a Node.js application. It's pretty simple. It just lets you create records, edit records, view records, and delete records. So pretty simple. And the way it works is I'm going to go into my folder here where I've written the code. You can see that there's just about 8 files in this folder. And what's cool about Cloud Foundry is that it makes it very easy for you to push your code up into Cloud Foundry. Now, typically, what you might do if you were creating your web application 10 years ago is you might FTP it or SFTP it into the folder where you want your code to run. That does work for some applications, but other applications need to be compiled or other resources need to be put together in order to make the application run, so that's not a good enough solution. What Cloud Foundry and Bluemix do is they let you to push your code up to the platform, and the platform then goes and compiles everything and builds everything and does everything it needs to do in order for that application to run. So all I have to do is log in, first of all, because I can't just do it from anywhere. I can't just be not logged in and push my code. That would be weird. But if I do CF, which stands for Cloud Foundry, so I install a very simple and small library on my computer, and it allows me to do this. So I do CF, login, dash A, which is basically stands for the application endpoint. And then I type in the endpoint, which is basically a web service. Can't remember if it's, hold on a second. Well, I remember if it's api.ng.bluemix. Let's see if that works. Looks like it's working. Okay, so it's authenticating my client here. It says I'm targeting. Now I have two environments that I can push to, so I'm going to go ahead and just push it into my development environment. And you probably can't read that very well either, so let me. It's a little better, okay. So now I am actually logged in, and I'm in the folder where my application code is, and I can simply type in cf push.
So did you have to create those environments, or is it by default?
Well, by default, you'll just have one, and then it wouldn't even ask you. So it's even easier if you're just getting started. The environment by default will be there, and it's an empty environment. There's nothing in it. So it's going to now take a look at my application code, and Bluemix, as well as other Cloud Foundry environments, have by default the ability to run Java, PHP, Ruby, Python, Node, web applications. So they already have the code, and so that's what it's doing right now, is it's determining what code I have, and then it's getting ready to deploy. And I think I'm running out of time here, so I better wrap this up pretty quickly. But it says that the build succeeded. So it went through a lot of steps. It's doing a lot of things for me that normally you would have to do yourself. It's actually creating a container. So you guys have heard about containers. Containers are all the rage now. It's actually building a container, which is an image, and it's putting that container into, that container image into a container and running it. And then Cloud Foundry can actually scale horizontally and run large numbers of them automatically if you want. So now it should be up there. Now what it should be able to do is, I'm going to go up here to Bluemix.net. This is the web application. Oh, actually, hold on a second. Let's go here. All right. So if I go to the Bluemix.net, and I go to my dashboard, computer's a little slow here. Yeah, it might be the network. It was working earlier, but it goes up and down. Well, anyway, so what would happen is I would see the dashboard that has the application has been uploaded and deployed, and I'd be able to actually go to the URL and see the application. Let me see if maybe the browser for some reason. Let me log in here.
How do you specify the resources for the application, or it just runs anywhere?
So the resources that are, you mean like, for example, the database, you can specify them in a configuration file, or, better yet, I can have them specified in Cloud Foundry, and then every time Cloud Foundry spins up a new instance, it injects the configuration data into the instance, and then you grab it out of the environmental variables. That way you're not putting the configuration data right into the files, right? So, yeah, I don't know what's going on here. I think the network's a little slow or something. But anyway, let me try one last thing here, which is, yeah, there we go. Okay, so I think something's a little slow with Bluemix logging in right there, but what would happen is I can actually see my application. This is the application I just uploaded. I know because I determined the URL, and I can go and edit records, etc. Boba Fett 2, save. You can see that it's saved, and this is actually connecting to Redis Labs, which has Redis Cloud and running database as a service, and it's built to run within Cloud Foundry, so you don't actually have to go and set up an external database. They are connected together through Bluemix, through a catalog, and so I just click a couple of buttons, it provisions the configuration details for my application to be able to use that database, and we're off and running. So I just wanted to end by saying that cloud native is something that you should take a look at and learn about. It's basically the concept that the way you really should build an application today. Cloud Foundry and Bluemix is one of these cloud native platforms. Basically kind of encourages you to build applications the way they really should be built. And Redis Labs provides Redis as a service or as software. And Redis is the most popular database in containers and on platforms today. So you put these two together and you really get a popular platform that you really can't go wrong with. And it's all open source, so it means you can run it yourself if you want. You can run it as a service on Bluemix or Redis Cloud. And you can also purchase enterprise support for the on-premise version. So you really can't go wrong. All right, well, I'm over my time here, so I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any questions, come see me outside because I think I need to give this over to the next speaker. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm way over. Sorry about that.